Ladies and gentlemen, we are at a facility owned by Mr. Jerry Gavai. I don't know if Jerry's around. But Mr. Gavai and other Guyanese over the years participated in an institution I had something to do with as a professor, National Defense University. And I often talked about Miles' Law, named after a gentleman, Rufus Miles. Rufus Miles made famous a proposition which we are beginning to see here now. We're beginning to see the application of Miles' Law in relation to what does Brexit means. What Rufus Miles said is, where you stand depends upon where you sit. From the vantage point of a British High Commissioner, sitting in one place, Brexit has these implications. From the vantage points of the Foreign Minister of Guyana, Brexit means something else. We're going to go now to see where CARICOM sits, in hearing from Ambassador Colin Grandison what his interpretation of some of the implications of Brexit means for CARICOM. Colin, welcome.
Madam Chair, members of the High Table, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. The Vice Chancellor started off by cautioning us that foreign policy based on unreality is dangerous. At the moment, the only reality is uncertainty. The only thing that is certain is uncertainty. But we can't wait for reality to manifest itself. We can't wait for reality to intrude and to have an impact on us. Therefore, we need to see to what extent we can look down the road and to try to identify what are some of the effects of Brexit on the Caribbean community. This is so all the more because of the long-standing and very close relations that CARICOM has had with the United Kingdom. The High Commissioner spoke of the Caribbean pivot, and I'll simply say yes, there was a Caribbean pivot, but there was a pivot by the UK government because there was a sense, certainly from the CARICOM side, that over the past 10 years or so, there was a certain distancing, a certain disinterest. It's quite clear that because of these concerns, as I said, we need to look down the road to the extent possible. We believe that we can look at the implications in a number of large categories: political, diplomatic, economic and financial, developmental. I'll also say a quick word about the British Overseas Territories, which are associate members and members of CARICOM. There's a sense that the initial focus of the United Kingdom is going to turn inwards, and it's going to have to recalibrate its external relations. It's quite possible, therefore, and the point was made by Foreign Minister Greenidge, that perhaps, I say perhaps, that far less interest may be paid to certain regions that from a security and a strategic point of view are far less important. We know that certainly for the EU at this moment, that what is taking place in Africa, and Africa as a market, is certainly far more important than the Caribbean community. Yes, it will be turning inwards, but there's also a countervailing argument that because the UK will be freed of the constraints that result from its membership of the European Union, that it will be far freer to be able to develop its historic ties. And the Caribbean community obviously would be part of these historic ties. Very important, I mention it very quickly because Foreign Minister Greenidge spoke to this in some detail. CARICOM is going to lose a sympathetic and supportive voice in the councils of the EU. Not that we always thought that the UK was 100% behind us and our concerns and interests, but we know we could speak to them, and we knew that they would understand the concerns that we were putting forward. The exit is taking place at a time when the European Union is in the midst of two major policy debates. One has to do with the relations between the EU and the ACP, African, Caribbean, and Pacific states, after 2020, the end of the Cotonou arrangements. The second major policy debate of great importance for us is the development policy. We know that the developed countries, over the past few years, have categorized the CARICOM member states as middle-income countries. And because we are supposed to have done, or we have done much better than many of the developed nations in the world, we have been graduated from easy access to concessional financing. And without concessional financing, there are obviously lots of hurdles with regard to high-cost projects such as infrastructure. It's already quite clear that the EU is moving in this direction, and as I said, in the absence of the UK, we believe that our concerns with regard to graduation and to what the EU calls differentiation could very well become a reality. There's also another dimension that hasn't been mentioned as yet. As you know, there's a very large Caribbean diaspora in the UK. And during the meeting between CARICOM foreign ministers and the foreign minister of the United Kingdom at the end of April, the issue was raised of the treatment of Caribbean immigrants. Many of them have been in the UK for the longest while. When I say longest while, persons who emigrated in the 50s and the 60s. And many of them have not been paying attention to the changes in immigration laws. And some of them have been finding themselves having run afoul of the immigration laws with the threat of being deported hanging over their heads. This is something obviously that we're going to have to take into account, and the CARICOM High Commissioners in London have had a number of meetings with their counterparts at the Foreign Office to raise this particular threat and concern. With regard to trade, I don't want to say too much because I think that Mrs. Bacchus, who is from the private sector, will speak at greater length about it. Foreign Minister Greenidge also had made allusion to the fact that the EPA, which governs our trading relationships with the United Kingdom, EPA obviously with the EU, that once the exit takes place, this will come to an end. Therefore, I will move on. With regard to the economic and financial, there are a number of concerns. It is feared that the decrease in the value of the pound sterling vis-à-vis United States dollar could lead to a reduction in the number of tourists holidaying in the Caribbean, as costs rise for United Kingdom tourists. Moreover, the expected economic contraction, not only in the United Kingdom, but other European economies as well, will cause job losses. And once there are job losses, it means that persons will have less discretionary income, and therefore this could lead to a slowdown or decrease in the number of tourists who come to the Caribbean from the UK and from the European Union. There's also obviously a concern of a general global economic slowdown. This has been predicted, and some of this was mentioned earlier by Dr. Singh in his presentation on the economic dimension of Brexit. Something we need to take into account, obviously, with the depreciation of the pound is that investments in the United Kingdom assets would have been negatively affected by the devaluation of the British currency. It also means that if, for example, our central banks have been invested in British assets, gilts, and other type bonds, that there will be losses. I will give a simple example. If Serena Williams had won Wimbledon a month ago, she'd have taken home $2.9 million US. Because she won it just a few days ago, she'll be taking home 2.6 million, a loss of $300,000. Just to give you an idea as to the extent at the moment of what has taken place as a result of Brexit. I spoke a bit earlier of our diaspora in the UK. We also need to take into account that a number of members of the diaspora have returned to the Caribbean to pass their having their resignations or having stopped working. It therefore means that their pensions are not going to be worth as much as they were previously. It also means that remittances have become a very important part of feeding foreign exchange into the economies of the Caribbean. The remittances, obviously, their value is going to fall off. With regard to the British overseas territories, as British citizens, all depending obviously on the arrangements that are made when the UK finally breaks from the European Union, they could find themselves losing the right to free access and free movement within the European Union. The quota and tariff-free access which they enjoy at the present moment could come to an end, and EU funding will be probably lost. The overseas countries and territories of the European Union benefit from a number of funds, and which are obviously very important for the economies of these countries. I've gone very quickly with regard to the impact, as I said, trade, political, economic, diplomatic, but we tried to come up with a number of recommendations. We believe that CARICOM needs to have a structured approach. We need to have a common message. We need to have a flexible strategy, and this needs to bring together both the technical and the political. Because it's quite clear that there's a whole technical dimension, whether it's financial, whether it's economic, that needs to be borne in mind, and not only political. It's going to be very important to keep under review the evolution of the Brexit process. It hasn't been triggered as yet. Once it is triggered, it's going to take some 2 years before it comes to an end. But it's very important, therefore, that CARICOM heads of mission, our high commissioners in London, our ambassadors in Brussels, are going to have to follow very closely the developments that will be taking place, both in Brussels with regard to the EU and in London with regard to the UK. We need to engage with the EU member states which have had no relations whatsoever with the Caribbean community. For many years, the CARICOM foreign ministers have been saying we needed to look at Eastern Europe. We needed to make an outreach to Eastern Europe. And this hasn't really been done. We organized some time ago in the margins of a CELAC EU, at the time it was Latin American Caribbean EU meeting. A meeting was held with the foreign ministers from the former Eastern European countries. But we haven't been able to build on this. We need to do so. As Foreign Minister Greenidge underlined, we need to find new advocates with the absence of the UK in the coming years. And therefore we need to find new friends, we need to make new allies. Not just for making friends, but we need to get some of these member states to better understand the concerns and the interests of small island developing states in particular. We need to deepen relations with existing partners. We have fairly good relations with France, with Germany, with Italy, with Spain, with the Netherlands, and we have been developing relations with new European partners such as the Nordic states and in particular Sweden. We also need to engage with the key EU institutions. The EU Parliament, for example, plays a very important role with regard to lawmaking, and it's an institution of which we know very little, and with which we've had very little contact. This is something that we need to do. We also needed to reach out also to EU civil society. The Economic Partnership Agreement speaks of relations with civil society, between CARICOM civil society and civil society groupings in the European Union. But this also is something which is in its infancy, and we have to build on it. In conclusion, I didn't want to repeat too much of what had preceded, but in conclusion, the community needs to be proactive. We need to evaluate and address the implications, and they are complex and they'll be numerous, which will emerge over time as the Brexit process evolves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Grandison. Where you stand depends upon where you sit. Rufus Miles.